Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. According to Wikipedia, that prayer in that form was first published in the old New England primer that our Unitarian ancestors, Puritans, used to learn to read. And for there, it was passed down somehow to my mama, because it was a prayer she would say with my brother Johnny and me at bedtime. I didn't take special comfort from that prayer. And I'm still not sure that it's a good idea to place in the mind of toddlers that they may die during the night. But in my preparation for this sermon on death, which is not the first one I've done from this pulpit, you can go back and read others, I found out that there's an old Bhutanese saying, folk saying, that it encourages us to think. It encourages us to think of that possibility. In fact, the saying is that to be a happy person, one must contemplate death 5 times daily. And guess what? There's an app for that. Oh my goodness, I can't get my coat off. Well, I just let it hang down on me. There it is, it came off. There's an app for that. I sometimes get hot when I preach y'all, especially about death. It's called We Croak. Capital W, little e, capital C-R-O-A-K, all one word. We Croak. I now have it on my phone when I watch. And 5 times a day, at random times and at any moment, just like this, I'm sending a reminder that I'm going to die. And when my watch vibrates and reminds me that I'm going to die, it gives me the option to open the app to reveal a quote about life and death. So, this is a quote from a philosopher or a poet or a notable thinker, and they are pretty good. Like Mary Oliver's words that came up to me this week saying, to live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, let it go. Forrest Church said that religion is the human response to being alive and having to die. That one hasn't come up on my WePro app yet, but it probably will at some point. Now, most of us here have had to deal with loved ones dying. Many of us have had parents to die. Some have had siblings that have died. Some have had to grieve the death of their spouses or partners, close friends, and some of us, even our children. And let us not forget those precious furry and feathery creatures that give us so much love. So we know that we too are going to die. You may not need an app to remind you. I just got it because I was working on this sermon and wanted to check it out and see if it did make me happier. And I must say that for me, yeah, it does work to contemplate that the life that I do have, knowing it is fragile and will not last, I savor it more. In my last sermon, I shared with you that there's some transitions in life that come suddenly and that we can't prepare for, but others we know about and we can prepare for. I shared that because I was talking about preparing for retirement, you know. And one thing we all know for sure is that we're all going to die. They used to say there are 2 things for sure in this world: death and taxes. But I found out that there are some folks, especially some rich folks, who don't pay taxes. But they're still going to die. It's the one thing we can be sure of. There's a lot of good information for you to read and study about death. And let me share one with you. Get my little cursor over here. Here's one of them. I'd recommend this book, Farewell, Vital End-of-Life Questions with Candid Answers from a leading palliative and hospice physician, Dr. Edward Cregan, a renowned specialist in oncology, palliative care, and hospice care. He has dedicated his life to death. For more than 40 years, he's been at the bedside with patients at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, addressing end-of-life questions for our patients and for their families too. His book is about navigating those final days and saying farewell with hope, love, and compassion. It's a comprehensive book, has some science in it, but it has a lot of great stories as examples of folks and families that he's dealt with and how they address certain situations. As of this draft, my Kindle now says I have about 30 minutes left of reading this book. It's good. Of course, there are also classics like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying, and there are books for grief support groups, kind of like the one we had here several years ago, and more. Much too much to cover in a sermon about death. So I decided that it might help me for this sermon to see what you were thinking about death and the preparations you had made. I made a Google survey and tried to get as many folks in my congregations as possible to fill it out. And on Tuesday, as I was drafting this sermon, I had 34 responses. All right. First thing I asked was, do you have a will? We've all been told that everyone needs a will, right? And I'm happy to report that 67.6% of the respondents reported that they indeed do have a will. But that means that 42.4% don't have one. And that's a pretty big number, especially for Unitarian Universalists. Pretty smart folks. Now, some say you're working on it, one of those things you're trying to get around to, you know. But 23.5% just said, no, I don't have one. Often folks think if they are poor or young, you know, I'm too young to have a will, I'm too poor to have a will. But their loved ones will usually tell you that they sure wish they did have one if they do die. Now, here's the next question. I also asked if you had an advanced director. Some of us call that the living will. Some of us had, there were 5 questions or something we fill out on that we did a while back in this congregation, some of us did. Most of us too that regularly go to a healthcare provider have had those folks insist that we complete one of these. Now, I had already done my own, but when my healthcare provider offered, I had her do one as well so that she could be fully informed of my wishes and have that on file in her office. And I also put it on file in our local hospital. Although they must not keep up with anything because they ask you to tell them the same questions every time you go in there, right? So I don't know if that's the things they have on file there. So it's also on my refrigerator, Greg, under a magnet. I realized I need to do that when one of my congregants at my other congregation died at home, and the emergency personnel insisted that they had to resuscitate him unless his spouse showed them that he had declared that he did not want resuscitation. So she had to do a quick hunt for that document. I was over there when she was hunting. Now you can imagine how frustrating that was, going through trying to find that thing, but we all knew he was dead. So mine is on my refrigerator. Now this time I do not have a DNR, do not resuscitate. And if I do decide on DNR in the future though, I'll check that box as well. That'll be right there on that refrigerator. When I was accompanying Jim and Peter Crandall recently near the end of Jim's life journey, Peter and I both thought at first that he would probably have to call EMS when Jim died. But then I read all through all the hospice information that you do not have to call EMS if the patient is under hospice care. You just call the hospice folks. They send the healthcare person over with a stethoscope to listen with that heartbeat and declare that your loved one has died. And the funeral home that you've already pre-selected when you signed up with hospice, they come pick up the body. No sirens and hunts for directives, etc. Just call hospice. And when the time came, that's what Peter did. On my little survey, I asked you what your thoughts were about hospice. Now, on this slide, I have the possibilities we have in Statesboro. And I kind of think, oops, I've gone too far on the slide. Let me go back one. There. I kind of think that the Regency and Gentiva are owned by the same folks. I'm not sure about that. I'm more familiar with Geechee because that's the one that I've dealt with. That's a nonprofit that most of us know about. But we do have choices now, and your healthcare provider will tell you about the choices that we have in Statesboro if you get ready for hospice. Well, when I asked about the responses, almost all the responses were glowing about hospice. Folks that had loved ones and had been through it were all glowing, especially if they had loved ones go through it. Now, a couple of folks mentioned that they had some problems with some of the hospice folks. You can imagine they're human beings, right? And one person said it would not be their first choice. They didn't say what first choice would be. Maybe something like assisted suicide, which I'll talk more about near the end of the sermon. I did not think to ask about palliative care when I was doing the survey, but I'll talk about it now. I assume most folks would be positive about this if they're positive about hospice. It's a broader category than hospice. It also, as you can tell from this, relates to focusing on improving your comfort and pain. But they still treat other sentences. It will still do some curative things, curative care as well under palliative care. Now, you can't have hospice care as a Medicare benefit unless physicians estimate, nobody knows, unless they estimate that you have 6 months or less to live. But you can have palliative care. They provide pain relief as well, perhaps not as much as hospice. But I say, bring it on, you know. I'm so glad that we had hospice care for my dad. I wish we had it with my first father-in-law, Fred Page Sr. He lived for several months after my mother-in-law died. I think this was before we had a hospice facility and hospice care in Statesboro. He had so many health problems, including congestive heart failure that was pretty far along. I can remember being at the old Bullitt Memorial Hospital with my then husband Fred and his 2 brothers as we watched him in agony. And the nurse explained to us that he was actively dying, and she shared with us, bless her heart for doing this, what we should expect as his organs shut down and his breathing became more labored. But for some reason, the Page boys did not listen to her and insisted that more be done to help him recover. So you know what they did? The hospital made the decision to put him in an ambulance and send him to Savannah. Let him die on somebody else's watch, I guess, especially with these 3 men so upset. When we got there, we went into the room he was in. My husband began to tell his dad that he needed to fight harder. He said, "You can do this, Dad. You have to fight." I let him know that we needed to talk in the hallway. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness he did listen to me. I said, "Did you not hear that nurse in Statesboro, Fred? Were you not listening to her? Your dad is dying. You are not helping by telling him to fight. He needs your permission to go in peace. Go let him know it's okay." So thank goodness, one time Fred did listen to me. He went back in and he told his dad that he didn't need to fight any longer. And he recited by heart the King James Version of the 23rd Psalm. If you know it, you can say it with me. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. My father-in-law, relaxed, went to sleep, and he was gone within a couple hours. May we all have folks around us who will give us permission to go. And thank goodness, those hospice angels encourage us to do just that. Now, the last sermon I shared with you was one related to identity, who you are. And if you missed it, you can go back to my sermon page and click on it and read it. So the next question in the survey is kind of a follow-up. I ask you, what do you think happens to the person at death? To the person at death. I read over these and I tried to categorize them. Almost half of you said that basically you did not know. Many of you seem to be fine with letting it be a mystery. But a couple of you said you worried about it and it kept you up some nights. A dozen said they believe that when you die, that personhood, the consciousness, is gone as well. Many followed up with the idea that you live on in memories and the works you did and more. Some of you said that your energy then merged or dissolved into the universe or something similar. But there were 5 folks who believed in some kind of afterlife where you would still be you, or that you would be reborn in some other form. I also asked, is there such a thing as a good death? And if so, describe an example. I think I thought about this because of a movie that I saw way back when called Legends of the Fall. And in that movie, the character played by Brad Pitt has his death described by an old Indian that had lived, and that he said that the character had lived a good long life and was out enjoying the woods by himself and did not come back. Some say that he was attacked, said the narrator, the old Indian, by a bear and was killed by the bear, perhaps eaten by the bear. And the movie actually kind of showed that with a haze over it, you know. Then the old Indian narrator said, it was a good death. And the movie ended. Somehow that stayed with me because I did not think of that as a good death. But maybe if I had grown up in that culture, I would honor it as a good death. By the responses you all gave me, I don't think you would view it as a good way to go either. Several of you described a good death as a peaceful death, maybe in old age without pain. One of you felt that your death could be deemed good if you had lived your life in a way that there would be people who would mourn the loss. Several of you mentioned having family members present. Although many of you thought that in your sleep was a good way to depart, one mentioned that their 93-year-old dad was singing and laughing when he suddenly died. And that changed their view of what a good death was. Many shared that the person's acceptance of death and being ready to go would make it a good death. One person thought I asked the wrong question. The person said, I'm not sure good and bad are the right adjectives. Perhaps it's more complicated than that. A more complicated way to think, maybe to ask questions about death as a part of life, or to ask the same questions about death that we ask about life. What do I want out of my death? What are the most important things to me who I want to be remembered about my death? What do I want to achieve with my death or the death of a loved one? And one person noted that death is necessary and should be under the terms of the person who is dying, if possible. And that leads to the question that I put off to the end. And that question is, what are your views of assisted suicide for terminal patients who desire this, and should it be legal? Now, I put it off to the end because I thought this one may be the one that's most controversial, and we may have different opinions here. And remember, that's okay, because we are Unitarian Universalists, and we don't have to think alike to love alike. Plus, we're going to have a discussion after the coffee break that we can share more about these things. As Sherry Barr likes to say, the preacher doesn't have the last word. So I did ask about views of assisted suicide, about patients who desire this and whether or not it should be legal. And 33% of folks said, yes, it should be legal. Now, there were 7 who were not sure or had caveats, various caveats about it, about whether or not it should be legal. And then there were 2 that just said it should not be an option. Some of those caveats were like, only if the patient is in extreme pain and the medication can't control it. Now, there was also one person that did say yes, but they said never for mental illness. Never for mental illness. Oh, I didn't ask about that, but they added that. As you might guess, I agree with the large majority who see that assisted suicide as an option for folks with terminal illness and think it should be legal. But I may go a step further than some of you. And since someone brought up mental illness, which was not what I initially asked for, but it was brought up, I'll go there. Although the National Center for Health Statistics shares all kinds of data about suicides, including attempts and successes by age, gender, whether or not a firearm was used, all those kind of things, you can look it up on their website. They do not provide data on what might have led to the decision, whether it was related to a terminal physical illness, mental illness, financial stress, or more. So I don't have any hard data to share with you. But a whole lot of the suicides that I hear about happen because folks are so seriously miserable and have been for so long, usually due to some mental illnesses like severe depression, or perhaps for other reasons like having physical illnesses that they cannot live with the quality of life that they would want. And they just want the pain and misery to be over. And they have to go to all kinds of efforts to make this happen and put their family through even more by finding them hanging in the backyard or shot with that gun that someone bought for protection. Now, I'm not saying that anyone who feels like they want to be dead should be allowed to have assisted suicide. No. There should be some kinds of requirements, like age requirements and processes they must go through. Perhaps trying different medicines and therapies over a period of time to be sure that nothing can make their life worth living. But it is their life. I am pro-choice for both birth and death. A mature adult should be able to make that decision and have some assistance in doing it the best way possible. My dad died of Alzheimer's. It was very difficult for my mom as his caregiver. My dad was not my dad when he died. he had become a different person. Not only did his memories go, his personality was not the same. Thankfully, he became sweeter rather than meaner, as often happens with some folks when they have Alzheimer's. He loved everybody, but he didn't know who any of us were, and he was miserable, especially when it came to be able to wanting to pee when he wanted to, even when he had a catheter. It was always that, this man was in so much agony for so long. He was in a lot of misery because he did not do the things he liked to do, or even things to keep him clean. He should have been under hospice care a long time before he was. But no doctor offered that as an alternative, and my mama didn't feel right bringing it up. Finally, when their doctor moved out of town and they had to go to someone new, the new doctor asked her what were her goals for my dad. And she said, I just want him to be comfortable. And that doctor advised hospice care. Finally. Now, my mama is 96 years old. She's still able to take care of herself, and she has a good mind. I'm hoping I got my mom's genes. But what if I got my dad's genes? I do not want to live like that. I don't want my family to have to take care of me like that, even if they say they want to do so. Now, I shared with you in my last sermon that there are some transitions we can prepare for. So, beloveds, I have a plan that I may have to carry out alone, I guess. But I will. Of course, I may change my mind, but it will be me changing my mind if I do. I do not believe suicide is a sin. I believe it's a choice. Some call it, instead of assisted suicide, they call it assisted death. I believe it's a choice. I'm not saying it's something you should consider. I'm just saying it's a choice we should have under certain conditions and requirements. Now, the only thing legal in our state is something called VFED. VFED, which is that's been upheld. Probably the only reason it is legal, it's been upheld by the Supreme Court. That if one is mentally capable of making a decision, they can do that. VFED stands for voluntary stopping eating and drinking.
Oh, okay.
It's sad that this is the only option because it takes a while. You can live a very long time without eating, especially if you have a little fat around the middle, So you have to quit taking any intake of liquids. You can't drink anything. You can't have any liquids at all, which can be very uncomfortable, to say the least. Now, if you're lucky enough to already be under hospice care, which you could possibly get if they can say you are within that measure of 6 months, you can get good drugs. But if you're not, then you have to tough it out, maybe for a good while, without food or water. Till you just start to mainly sleep because everything is shutting down. Or you can make your own plans for speeding up the process. It's helpful if you can find someone to assist you, but if not, it can still be done alone. It's your life, it's your death. You should get to make those decisions. Forrest Church said, Unitarian Universalists are neither a chosen people nor a people whose choices are made for them by theological authorities, ancient or otherwise. We are a people who choose. Georgia is one of the states that has at least considered physician-assisted suicide, though it did not pass through our legislature. Who knows? Maybe, if we can get more progressive folks in office in our legislature, this will be a right that we all have as well. I did ask one further question on my survey, and that was an opportunity for you to share other thoughts about death. All were interesting to read, but I'm going to close with a quote from one of them, and I'll put it up here so you can read it as well. This is from Douglas Hofstadter's book, I Am a Strange Loop. That one of you put this quote in, and it said that this is what you always quote if somebody asks you to say something at a funeral or memorial service. It seems to me, therefore, that the instinctive, though seldom articulated purpose of holding a funeral or a memorial service is to reunite the people most intimate with the deceased and to collectively rekindle in them all the special living flame that represents the essence of the beloved person, even the shared presence of that person in the brains of those who remain. Though the primary brain has been eclipsed, there are for those who remain and who are gathered to remember, they can reactivate the spirit of the departed. It's a corona that still glows. That is what human love means. The word love cannot be separated from the word I. The more deeply rooted the symbol for someone inside you, someone you hold in your heart. My heart goes on, that first song we heard, the greater the love. And the brighter the light that remains behind. And it does remain. I am thankful that we have a whole lot of love for one another in this room. We have a whole lot of love. Yes, indeed, beloveds, we are all going to die. But that love that we share with one another will remain. May it be. May it be.